Welcome to another edition of the All Cardinals podcast. Your host, Donnie Druin, joined by my co-host. Every time we basically record, Richie Bradshaw. You can find us on Twitter at Donnie Druin, at Richie Brads36. Richie, we've been holding out for a really long time on when the next episode would be. Feels like what better time, right?
I think that there's a little bit of content for us to discuss right now.
Just a little bit. I know the season had just concluded in week 18 with the Cardinals losing to the San Francisco 49ers on Sunday, locking up the number 3 pick in the 2023 NFL draft. But there's plenty of time to get the draft talk, and we will eventually get the draft talk here on the show. A bunch of moves, a bunch of things that have happened within the last 4 to 8 hours. 3 big, obvious elephants in the room. Number 1, Steve Keim, gone, resonated from his spot. Kliff Kingsbury, gone, fired from his spot. Potentially DeAndre Hopkins will be gone here in the future. And I really like how all of those kind of twist and tie into each other because they all kind of, it's like a chain. Like all of those somehow just like find a way to like interlock with each other. And I want to start with Steve Keim. Said that, well, he didn't say anything. The team announced on Monday morning, whenever they did fire Kliff Kingsbury, that he was stepping down from his role as general manager. There's a couple people saying that he can still return in some capacity, but it looks like it will not be Keim's show moving forward. Keim took over the GM spot in 2013 with the Cardinals. And, for a very, very long time, people had, gone back and forth on whether or not he actually deserved the GM job. Been with the Cardinals since 1999 as a scout, put his time in. Whenever Michael Bidwell spoke with reporters on Monday, he looked really sincerely sad that Keim was leaving. And I kind of got the impression that it wasn't like a forced out kind of thing, that Bidwell was genuinely shocked that Keim decided to step down, and then for health-related reasons.
Yeah, it's a very delicate situation that we're taking a look at because there's so much behind the scenes that the public doesn't know, that even the media doesn't seem to know. There's so many moving parts to this situation, but ultimately this was a marriage that needed to end sooner rather than later for the Cardinals to start making more positive progress and moving forward as an organization, getting back to competing on a more annual basis instead of every 3 to 4 years like it has been during the Steve Keim era. And beyond that, honestly, I mean, the Cardinals are routinely considered one of the stellar teams in the NFL. Eventually, you want to get out of that position. In order to get to that point, some very tough decisions had to be made. And Michael Bidwell has shown a lot of loyalty to Steve Keim. He's the general manager for 10 seasons. He was with the team almost as long as me and you have been alive. There's a lot of heartache that goes into that final decision, but I do believe that ultimately it is the right decision to make, and now will hopefully be a new chapter, maybe even a new book for the Arizona Cardinals moving forward as a franchise.
Fans can certainly hope so too. Given the team had made the playoffs in 2021, there was a lot of expectations, and that's why you saw guys like Kliff, Keim, Kyler, Vance Joseph even have their contracts extended last offseason because there were legitimate beliefs and expectations that the team would be a perennial playoff team moving forward, and that just wasn't the case. And I think the one thing that might have saved Keim and Kliff's job were the injuries that suffered from basically the opening week of the regular season all the way up until the end. It just felt like every week the injury report was clogged. I think only 2 other teams in the NFL had more guys on injured reserve compared to the Arizona Cardinals whenever it was all said and done. So I think had they decided to roll with Kliff and Keim another year, that might have been their saving grace. But I remember talking to you and our good buddy Austin Verzocco on Saturday night. And we were talking about, just diving into whether or not those 2 should stay, whether or not Michael Bidwell would actually fire them. I think those were 2 completely separate conversations on whether they deserve to stay or whether or not Bidwell is actually going to do something. And I'll never forget, we all sat around and we talked and we said, you know what? In 48 hours, we'll know if Michael was like his father. Right. Because for Bidwell to eat the contract that Kliff has, which we'll get into that a little bit later, on top of paying another coach to come in, right? On top of trying to find another general manager, it's a lot. It's a lot to take on. It's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of financial responsibility. So I'm just glad, right or wrong, that Michael Bidwell has decided, you know what, enough is enough. Now is the time we need to make a change. And I think everybody's worst fears can finally be put behind them, that Michael is kind of not like his father in a bad way.
Yeah, and I mean, that was definitely something that we were all wondering, is whether or not Michael is, okay with settling for mediocrity and settling for just selling out that stadium. The Cardinals do that very, very well. Unfortunately, more often than not, it feels like it's the opposing team's fans that end up there, but the stadium sells out. They have other events that go on at the stadium as well, several concerts, several different events and whatnot. So there was definitely going to be that question of whether or not Michael Bidwell is fine with continuing to put out the product that he is, because he is still selling out the stadium and he is doing this, that, and the other for the football team. It feels like he put his foot down with this decision and said, enough is enough. We need to finally move forward. And he's done it in a professional way, right? It's not like he's come out and slandered Kliff or slandered Keim or anything like that. It's just the team is needing to make changes, and Bidwell acknowledging that and actually doing what we all know his father never would have done.
Completely agree. And let's not forget, too, there's a Super Bowl that's going to be played in State Farm Stadium in about a month's time. He's going to get a lot of money from that. It would have been very easy for Michael Bidwell to kind of sit in this chair, count the hundreds and hundreds of monies that are coming his way, pure American monies that are going to be sat on his desk. It would have been very easy for Mr. Bidwell to sit there and not worry about the team's on-field performance. Like I said, he could have rolled the dice with Kliff another year, could have rolled the dice with Keim another year, but ultimately he decided enough was enough. And I think that's a really, really nice thing for fans to kind of know moving forward. Because the general manager spot is open for the first time since 2013. The Cardinals have already reached out and requested permission for a handful of candidates. The first one was the Chicago Bears assistant general manager, Ian Cunningham. He's only been in that role for a year, but he is probably one of the more respected up-and-coming people. The Athletic actually did a top 40 under 40 list, and Cunningham landed on that list. The Bears' current general manager, Ryan Poles, I think that's how you say his name. I'm going to butcher a lot of these names, so please forgive me. The Bears' current GM had a lot of really nice things to say about him. They have also requested permission for the 49ers directors of player personnel, Adam Peters and Ron Carthon, I think that's how you say his name. If either of them get hired, I promise I'll learn how to pronounce them. Obviously, two guys very, very high within a now well-respected 49ers organization. They've built probably one of the best teams in the NFL up to this point. Obviously, Kyle Shanahan running the show helps as well. But, the player personnel side of all of that definitely helps. Tennessee's Monty Austinfort, assistant general manager as well. I believe he's been in that role for the last 2 years. He's bounced, I believe, from the Texans to the Patriots. He spent about 14 to 15 years with the Patriots, obviously working with Bill Belichick and, being involved in one of the more successful franchises we've seen in the last couple of decades. Certainly a resume booster as well. Whenever it comes to actual interviews that we know about thus far, Michael Bidwell did confirm that both Quentin Harris and Adrian Wilson from the Cardinals did interview for the position. And then also today it was reported that former New York Giants general manager Jerry Reese, who won 2 Super Bowls with the team in 2007 and 2011, I believe that last year was correct. They'll check me on that. Okay, we got to get a strong opinion for that. He did interview for that opening right there. I'll go ahead. I'll leave it to you because I don't think you're the only one who feels like that.
Jerry Reese is another example of a guy who overstayed his welcome, was able to ride the magic of Eli Manning, benefit from those 2 Super Bowl rings to build up a, resume that makes it seem like he's a lot better than he actually is. The only bright side I can think of with hiring Jerry Reese is he hates drafting linebackers in the first round, and maybe that can finally end the Cardinals consistently drafting linebackers in the first round. That is the only upside I can think of with Jerry Reese. He's not been in the NFL since 2017.
Yep.
That is the definition of settling for mediocrity. And that, as we were just praising Michael Bidwell. And now I'm going to go right back to that is absolutely what his father would do, is hire Jerry Reese. That would be a terrible decision.
Yeah, you sound just like your father.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just wait till my father hears about this.
5 years is definitely a long time. And I think with how rapidly the game is changing, 5 years definitely does not feel like 5 years whenever it comes to the tenure of a guy like that. But certainly a lot of work being done, a lot of candidates already being requested to be interviewed. Somebody asked Michael if there was a sense of urgency with this, because the Cardinals did wait until the end of the regular season to do this. They fell behind teams such as the Texans, the Panthers, the Colts, and the Broncos, just in terms of trying to get a head start on their head coaching job and / GM job too. How this ties together is obviously, for good reason, Mr. Bidwell wants to have a general manager in place before there's a head coach in place. And how this kind of impacts everything is until you have that GM, at least in the world of Michael Bidwell, until you have that guy, you cannot go out and get a head coach. And Richie, we know the head coach market dries up extremely fast. There are about, I think, 5 openings this year, including the Cardinals, half of the number that we saw last year with an NFL record 10 openings. The pool is not going to be very, very wet for long. Yes. It's got to be working against the Cardinals that they waited this long, right?
I would think so. And here's the other thing is looking at head coaches for a second. Some of the best options that you're looking at are teams that are in the playoffs. Like Shane Steichen, for example, is going to be coordinating for the Eagles for their potential Super Bowl run. Like, you really have placed yourself behind the 8 ball. I know there's 2 sides to this argument. I know that some people will say there's no point in firing your head coach midseason compared to college football, where with college football, you can start a brand new recruiting process under new management kind of thing. That makes sense. The pros doesn't make as much sense by that argument. However, the time that you could have spent doing more research, you were too busy backing up a coach that you knew you were going to fire at the end of the season. It's just tough. And it's 2 sides of the coin, depending on how you want to look at it. If you're the more pessimistic or you're the more optimistic, when it comes to whether or not you should be firing your head coach midseason or at the end of the season. Me personally, I think that this should have been a decision that they made earlier in the year. To be specific, I mean, I would have thought about this after the first 49ers game when you lost 38-10 at home. But that's just me. And it's a very different situation for the Cardinals because of the history that the team has when it comes to making personnel decisions.
No, absolutely. I feel like a perfect time would have been the bye week. You only had a few weeks left in the season. You were already pretty much out of playoff contention at that point. And I think Bidwell said something really interesting. He said he wanted to wait until the final week of the season to take in the season's totality of it all. And I can respect that to one point, because you really do want to get all 17 games to evaluate somebody before you make any true defining decisions. Because let's be real, with a new head coach and new general manager in town for Arizona, this has the potential to change Arizona's trajectory long term, right? So we'll certainly see how all of this plays out, but I don't know. I feel like you put it best. You put yourself behind the 8 ball whenever you see other organizations. I think Steichen's already had 3 teams request to interview him. Dan Quinn's has already had 2 or 3 as well. And we'll get to this here in a second, but like Sean Payton is already a very, very strong candidate to go other places as well. Bidwell had kind of like a shit-eating grin on his face whenever somebody directly asked about him. Yeah. Use your MA. I don't care, YouTube. I just say it. I'm sorry. Had a you know what rating. I know, right? had that grin on his face whenever asked about it. Euro stepped through it like Luka, like a pro. I don't know, man. It's just I wish, because let's say the Cardinals won that game on Sunday. That shouldn't have saved Kliff's job, right?
Right. No, 100%.
So at what point are we kidding ourselves? Because there were already reports that he went through a couple different programs to look at minority head coaching candidates weeks before the season ended. And like these guys talk to each other, so it's not like Michael didn't know who was going to be, a potential head coaching hire the next year. It's not like he didn't know the names that were floating around in the pool. He would have had to have known. So for him to officially wait until the end of the year, I don't know. I would have done it the bye week personally, but we're just two white dudes chilling, sitting on a podcast, and we're not making the money that neither Bidwell, Keim, or Kingsbury have been making. So moving forward to Kliff Kingsbury, though. Obviously fired after 4 years. He helped bring Kyler Murray here to the organization in 2019, built Arizona up to a playoff berth last year in 2021. But just you got the sense that it was coming for a very, very long time. And you saw a bunch of rumors and reports. And obviously you can't believe everything that you see and read. But where there's smoke, there's fire. And when there's multiple people coming out and saying that Kingsbury is coaching for his job just a couple weeks into the season, you knew it was kind of doomed from the start. Injuries was kind of like the final nail in the coffin for Kingsbury's tenure here. I don't think he's going to be too upset. That dude looked extremely stressed throughout the year, and he has to chill at home with a very, very nice girlfriend in a very, very nice house with a very, very nice paycheck coming to him until 2026.
I certainly feel bad for him. That's for sure.
I don't know, man. It needed to happen. And I want to say that Kliff seems like a really good, genuine guy. And I think when we talk about Kliff Kingsbury, we need to talk about him as the coach and not the person. And it's just like everybody, everybody in the NFL, like these are actual human beings. These are fathers and brothers and sons and all of the good stuff too. And I don't want that to get caught in the crossfire whenever we talk about these kind of things happening. But Kliff needed to go, right? Like there was no real option of him staying next year.
None. No, this was a personnel move that needed to happen just for the growth of this organization. Like I mentioned earlier, like the Cardinals have been one of those teams that has settled for mediocrity, and they've been okay with selling out that stadium, whether that's a lot of Cardinal red or whether it's a lot of opposing team colors. They feel like they're just more interested in cashing paychecks than they are actually putting a product on the field. This move tells me that maybe I'm still going to hold out, because if they promote Vance Joseph, then we're settling for mediocrity again. But if they do go out and make a splash move, if they can somehow pull a Sean Payton or a Jim Harbaugh or a Shane Steichen, that tells me that Bidwell is more interested in putting out a good product on the field and actually generating fan bases, conversation, and building a brand that the Cardinals have not had.
Well, here's the most important thing, too. If you put a good product on the field, more than likely you are going to make the postseason. If you make the postseason, sometimes that involves a home playoff game, which brings a load of revenue to Michael Bidwell's pocket. So I definitely think there's a big incentive for him to put a very good and competitive team out on the field, one that can win. And I think Bidwell kind of said it best during his press conference yesterday. 13 months ago, this team was 12-2. This team was 12-2 13 months ago. And to see the decline that has happened, you can say what you want about injuries. You can say about DeAndre Hopkins suspension. At the end of the day, you have 53 guys on your team that you need to coach. That is why building a roster from top to bottom is so important. I will never forget watching Mike McCarthy on the America's game whenever the Packers beat the Steelers in the Super Bowl in 2010. He gave a speech to his entire team and said, if we want to win the Super Bowl, guy number 1 is just as important as guy number 53. And I think until the Cardinals figure that out, they're never going to get there. You can excuse all the injuries you want. The next guy needs to step up. So many times we have heard the mantra, next man up mentality. Everybody gets hurt. All 32 teams in the National Football League deal with injuries. Not as much as the Cardinals did last year, but still, guys are required to step up. They get paid too.
Yeah, 100%. It's about team building at this point. And the Cardinals are going to need to do a lot of team building moving forward. It's going to start with establishing a new culture which is going to be, whoever they decide to hire. And that's the next thing I want to touch on real quick is building a new culture moving forward means going out of your organization. You bring in Vance Joseph, nothing's going to change. I promise you. And old takes expose, whatever. I promise if you hire Vance Joseph, you're going to have another losing season. You're going to be picking in the top 10, and you're going to be wondering why you're treading water instead of moving forward as a franchise.
I think I would agree. And that's coming from somebody who would not hate the Vance Joseph hire, but I get it. Like, this is your opportunity to really right the ship here in Arizona. I don't think Vance Joseph is quite that guy based off the things we've seen in the past. And I know like a selling point for a lot of people who want Vance to get that job is the players play hard for him. Players play hard for pretty much any coach they play under. One, because they respect that man, and two, because they're getting paid a lot of money to do so. Now, obviously, we have seen some teams just go completely to the wayside, Denver Broncos, whenever it comes to the playing for, certain coaching staffs and whatnot. Vance is a good guy. I think sometimes Vance gets a lot of shtick for how the Cardinals defense has let him down at times. But I also think that sometimes ultimately it's up to Joseph, right? And, part of that blame as a defensive coordinator, as a head coach in the National Football League, falls on your shoulders to put your guys in the right positions to succeed. And, times Vance Joseph has done that. Other times he has not. As a head coach, I completely agree with you. I think you can go completely outside of the organization, which leads me to my next question for you. Who is it?
Man, well, first of all, go ahead and plug in that you guys need to check out all Cardinals content as I put out a list of 13 coaching candidates for the Cardinals.
13.
Yeah, 13, some of which are high profile, some of which you may not have thought of. The question is going to be, do you want to stay on the offensive side of the football, or do you want to take a look at the defensive side of the football and get that side right? The important thing is whoever you hire, Kyler Murray needs to be on board with it. At this point in time, now that he is, signed on long-term with a large investment in his contract, he now needs to be, right, wrong, or indifferent, involved in personnel decisions. Like, it's just, it comes with the territory of signing a guy to that kind of contract, is they need to have the power to understand who they want to be that coach. I'm not saying if Kyler Murray says no, that you can't hire them.
Right.
But he does need to be part of the process to make that decision.
Thank you. Sorry, really quick.
Yeah.
People overreacted all the way to hell whenever Michael Bidwell was asked if Kyler would have some input, and he said, I think so.
Yeah.
Everybody took that and ran with it. Look, Kyler is not signing checks in the organization. He is not the final say whenever it comes. But whenever you saw Kyler and Kliff Kingsbury get into it, not once, not twice, but more than that on national television, and reports come out later in the season that, that relationship is fractured, don't you think he wants a guy who he's at least going to want to be there?
Exactly. And again, that doesn't mean it needs to be an offensive mind. It doesn't mean that it needs to be like 100% Kyler's decision, but he needs to have some kind of input. For me personally, I think that your last several coaches, Donnie, have been offensive-minded guys. Going back to Ken Wisenhunt, going to Bruce Arians, going to Kliff Kingsbury. The one exception was Steve Wilkes for 1 year, and he was completely set up to fail, if we're going to be honest. That one exception in the last 15 plus years, I think you need to look at the defensive side of the football. I think you need to find a guy who can generate a new culture, because maybe, hint, hint, a former player, maybe somebody who has been a very well-respected, not just player, but coach over the last several years, has built himself up as one of the hottest candidates. To me, if I'm making the decision, I want DeMeco Ryans to be my next head coach.
I think you do a lot worse than that, and I think we'll ultimately see him take a job somewhere. I'm not sure if that place is going to be Arizona, but
it's
man, like you talk about it is, and like there's a risk with everything, Right, and that's something that Bidwell and whoever is the GM is going to have to kind of balance that like risk reward from, right? Like you taking a guy who has no prior head coaching experience before. I mean, and like if it's a defensive guy, you're going to have to also look for an offensive coordinator as well. So that there's a lot of like balance that's going to have to come with us, right? But at the end of the day, you need somebody who's going to maximize the potential of the players on your roster. You are going to need somebody to lead. And I think you hit it best and change the culture. The losing culture that the Arizona Cardinals and their fans have seen for so long. Few years here and there between where they had some really, really nice runs. Obviously, the Super Bowl run in 2008, the run to the NFC title game in 2015. Fans want to feel that again. And I feel like if you were to bring on a guy like DeMeco Ryans, I just think he might be able to push you a little bit closer to that. Let me get your thoughts on Dan Quinn.
I like it. I really, really like it, and here's why. Dan Quinn has been one of the most well-respected defensive minds for the better part of 10 years. Everyone forgets Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator for the Legion of Boom because Gus Bradley had taken a job with Jacksonville. Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator that year. And it's not just that 1 year that he has. The Legion of Boom was several very good years. He goes to Atlanta. He kind of rebuilds their culture. Atlanta wasn't a defensive dominant team, but he's able to make household names out of Grady Jarrett and Desmond Trufant and Deion Jones and Keanu Neal. They're able to play really hard for this guy. You want to talk about player coaches. Dan Quinn's a player coach. Now he's in Dallas. Look at what they're doing. Micah Parsons, as a rookie, was a defensive player of the year candidate. This year, they had right about 60 sacks. I think they were a little less than that. But Dorrance Armstrong came out of nowhere for almost double-digit sacks. DeMarcus Lawrence returned to his Pro Bowl form. They got production from Dante Fowler. They got production from rookie Sam Williams. Like, they got a lot. He was able to take Trayvon Diggs from an all-or-nothing corner to a we're not even going to bother throwing at this guy kind of player. Dan Quinn knows defenses. Dan Quinn, I would argue, is one of the 5 smartest defensive minds in the NFL, regardless of being a head coach or not. I think that Atlanta probably needed to move on, but I'll also argue that they moved on too quickly from Dan Quinn. And I think that the Super Bowl shell shock that they endured for more than one reasons against the Patriots kind of dismantled that team. And I don't think Dan Quinn is the major culprit for that. I think that there was a lot going on behind the scenes. I think Dan Quinn deserves another opportunity to be a head coach. And that would be one of my 3 favorite hires for the not the Sun Devils, excuse me. I'm used to talking about Arizona State. That would be one of my 3 favorite hires for the Cardinals, up there with DeMeco Ryans. And if you could somehow swing Shane Steichen.
Now, let me just hammer that point on Dan Quinn a little bit here, too. It's not like there's not a defensive chess piece on the Cardinals defense that nobody kind of really knows what to do with an Isaiah Simmons, right? We've seen Dan Quinn take almost a very, very similar guy in Micah Parsons and just maximize his strengths for Dallas's defense. Yep. If you were to get him in Arizona, you would finally be able to feel at least comfortable with whatever Isaiah Simmons is doing. There's a lot of talk, about whether Simmons is a linebacker, whether he's a safety, whether he's a slot guy. Some people want to put him on edge rusher. I say wide limit him, have him bounce around, but if you can get a guy who knows what he's doing with a similar archetype player, and I think that would go leaps and bounds for your defense and the progression of what everybody in Arizona believes to be one of the best utility guys in the NFL.
Yes, absolutely. He is the equivalent of the queen piece on a chessboard. You can place him all over the place. That was the reason he was a top 10 pick just a few years ago, is we looked at him and we're like, we can play him all over the place. I mean, he started at safety in the last game of the year for the Cardinals.
Last 2, yeah.
Yeah, they were not afraid to start getting creative with him. And he had 99 tackles last year. He had 4 sacks. He had 2 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles. I mean, he does everything. It's just a matter of being able to just take all of these pieces that are all over the place and culminate them together into a complete Pro Bowl player that Isaiah Simmons is entirely capable of. He's now 3 years into his career. I feel like he's gotten better every year. I'm waiting for somebody to finally take him to the next stage of going from a crafty athlete to a Pro Bowl player. He is entirely capable of taking that next step. I think he needs a better defensive mind, which is another reason why I think that Vance Joseph should not be the head coach. I don't think he's the guy to take Simmons to the next level.
I think we're both on the Steichen train, right? Like
Yes.
Shane Steichen is very, very high up on our list for obvious reasons. Let's say, because if you look at Arizona, a lot of people don't think it's a really good destination for a head coach. I think the opposite. I think you're looking at a team with the number 3 overall pick. You're looking at a completely brand new regime in the front office. You're looking at a franchise quarterback who you don't have to worry about paying. He's already there. Yep. And granted, Kyler coming back from an ACL injury, a lot of questions around that. But at least you have a guy moving forward. Beautiful weather out here in Arizona. I mean, dude, we were wearing shorts and T-shirts on Christmas. Like, how much better does that get? And you're already in a place where you can bring your family. Yep. Very patient ownership as well. So I think there's a lot working for a head coach who wants to come here to Arizona, assuming Shane Steichen is that guy. And that's a very, very bold assumption, right?
Right.
Does Vance Joseph stay?
Here's the thing. If you bring in a Shane Steichen, if you bring in a D'Amico Ryans, these are young guys with their first head coaching opportunity, and they deserve the chance to build their own staff. They deserve the opportunity to put together their own coaching tree, so to speak. It would be a very tough selling point to these young guys to be like, hey, Shane, we would love for you to be our head coach, but just so you know, we are keeping 4 of our current coaching staff members, including Vance Joseph, on staff right now, but you can fill the rest of the positions. To me, that is treading water. That's going backwards. That if I'm Shane Steichen, if I'm D'Amico Ryans, I'm no longer interested in the Cardinals job. I'm more interested in a job like Indianapolis, where I would be able to build my own staff, or Houston, where I'd be able to build my own staff. So the Cardinals need to be aware that they might have to make another difficult decision if it means taking that next step to the future. Maybe a Dan Quinn wouldn't mind Vance Joseph staying on roster, but the young up-and-coming guys that the whole league is obsessed with, thanks to Sean McVay, you might have to move on from Vance Joseph, right, wrong, or indifferent.
No, devil's advocate, though. If you're a young guy coming onto the team, wouldn't you want a guy like Vance Joseph, who has head coaching experience in the league, who has been within the walls of the facility, to kind of help shepherd you a little bit into your first head coaching role?
Yeah, potentially, on 100%. And that's another thing to consider with your GM hire as well, is you might want a guy who has a little bit more experience compared to a young up-and-comer like Ian Cunningham. It would be super, super risky to go with Ian Cunningham and Shane Steichen. That is an all-or-nothing kind of front office and coaching staff. That is we're going to be in the Super Bowl in 5 years, or we're going to have a new coaching staff in 3 years.
Yeah, that's a put all your money on black at the roulette table kind of move.
That is a Charles Eastridge strategy right there.
So we talked about a couple different coaching candidates, and there's one name that keeps coming up that a lot of Cardinals fans want, a lot of fans covet. We don't really know how it's going to play out. I do want to get your 2 cents on him, though.
Gerard Mayo.
Yes. Walk me through if you would personally like to see Sean Payton here, and if you would give up significant draft capital to get Sean Payton here.
Define significant, like a second-round pick?
According to NFL insider Benjamin Albright, it's going to take more than a first-round pick to get Sean Payton out of New Orleans.
Then no thank you. I would agree. If I'm the Arizona Cardinals, I need those picks. Because while we have said before this is a talented team, this is a team that's better than 4-13, you still need cornerstones. How many cornerstones do they have right now? Kyler Murray? Buda Baker? That might be it. Like you can make the argument that like Isaiah and like Zaven are working their way up too. Right. But I mean, I don't know if Marquise Brown is that guy yet. James Conner's closer to 30 than he is anything else.
And he's
There's
a
no one
running
on that
back.
defensive round. Yeah, there's no corners right now unless Byron Murphy comes back. And even then, to call him a cornerstone might be a little too extreme. The Cardinals need the number 3 pick. They need a first-round pick next year. They need the quality picks that they have this year in order to add more cornerstones. You can't give that up for a guy who, if we're being honest, kind of struggled with the new era of football. Part of that was the reason being that he was so stubborn and wanted to stay with Drew Brees. But after the Brees era, the Saints fell off a little bit. And I don't know if he's the guy that I want right now for the next era of football. And he's never had a guy like Kyler Murray to work with. Kyler Murray is on a completely different spectrum than Drew Brees is in several different categories. This is uncharted territory for Sean Payton to be working with this team. It's an exciting thought because Sean Payton is a Hall of Fame coach, but this is not a slam dunk hire that a lot of Cardinal fans might think it is.
Would it be a slam dunk hire if you didn't have to give up the draft capital?
Potentially, simply because of the resume. But again, I'm gonna echo here. He definitely took a step back when Brees got older, refused to move on from Brees, and then had life post Drew Brees. This is a guy who showed some regression as a head coach. Now this is a completely different offense. It's a slam dunk hire because it's a proven name that might be able to draw some free agents, might be able to draw some prime coaching candidates, whatnot like that. It definitely would help ticket sales, but it is still a gamble.
I think the big thing with Peyton too would be the culture shock, right? I mean, we've talked already a bunch of the show about how the Cardinals need to have that kind of change in culture. I think if you're looking for that, a proven guy, I mean, besides like Dan Quinn, like you're really not going to get that anywhere else besides Sean Payton, and he's a guy who knows how to win a Super Bowl. He's had very, very talented teams in New Orleans. But I just think at the end of the day, like if you're looking for a proven guy to help right the ship sooner rather than later, it's really hard to sell anybody else but Sean Payton on the Cardinals sideline in 2023. Now, when you factor the draft capital into that, that's where it kind of gets wonky a little bit, right? Because like you said, Arizona is not a 4-13 team, but they still need those draft picks to help them kind of get to the places where they want to be. Counter argument to that, though, you know, if we're sitting here and talk about how important a coach is to really change the direction of this franchise, isn't that worth a first-round pick?
Yes and no.
Right. And I think that's the point. I think if this was like pick number 31 or 30, we're kind of talking maybe a little bit differently. You're looking at Jalen Carter or Will Anderson at pick number 3. Minimum.
Those are cornerstones.
Those two guys individually have the opportunity to help transform Arizona's defense. And then you look at the weapons the Cardinals offense is supposed to get back. I mean, that's exciting. That's going to get ticket sales through here.
Yeah, that's jersey sales. That's ticket sales. That's investment in podcasts, investment in the journalism. The news would be all over it. There's a lot more that you can do with a 21, 22-year-old rookie cornerstone than a coach who just took a year off from football.
Absolutely. So I do like the prospect of Sean Payton coming here. Vic Fangio would be his defensive coordinator, which I would not hate either. At minimum, it would be a breath of fresh air. But I think there's a lot of candidates that the Cardinals will have to go through here soon. At the end of the day, though, I think everybody can agree, go outside the organization. So badly. You've already hit 2 major points, and getting rid of Keim and getting rid of Kingsbury. All of that won't go to the wayside, but like you're really holding yourself back as an organization if you keep in-house hires in here. How many times do the Cardinals have to learn that sometimes a fresh perspective is the best perspective? I know sometimes the grass isn't always greener, but man, sometimes you just need to feel what the other grass feels like.
Yep, 100%. And it's time for that change.
A lot of changes coming. Talked about the head coach, talked about the general manager. This all ties into each other. right? So today, the scores, Jordan Schultz reported that the Cardinals would look to trade wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins. A lot of stuff to digest here. We'll kind of just go through the basic talking points here. Hopkins has 2 years left on his contract. He will have cap hits of roughly over $30 million and roughly $26 million the last 2 years of that deal. If he were to be traded pre-June 1st, he would carry a dead cap of $22.6 million. I believe a post-June 1st designation would be 11.33. Don't exactly quote me on that. I think that is the number, though. What's most important, though, is Hopkins has a no-trade clause in his contract. So he has to agree to the deal before that deal officially goes through and he is sent packing to insert your favorite team here. How this all ties in together is, how are the Cardinals going to wheel and deal with this trade if there is no general manager and no head coach that is going to want to have a say in whether or not arguably one of the best receivers in the NFL right now, despite being at the age of 30, whether or not he's going to be on the roster or not?
It's a tough selling point. It truly is. Remember when we talked about cornerstones? There's a reason we didn't mention DeAndre Hopkins. And the reason why is because we don't anticipate him to be here. Now, if he is, then yes, that's a cornerstone. He's only going to be 31 or 32 years old coming into this year. I think 31. He is still shown this year in the limited action that he had that he can remain a top 5 receiver in the league. And he has shown no signs of slowing down outside of being nicked up a little bit here and there. The suspension, I mean, you take that away, he was on pace for like 1,400 yards this year. He has not shown signs of slowing down. That would be really tough for an offensive mind like a Sean Payton or a Shane Steichen to come to the franchise and be like, oh, well, I'm losing DeAndre Hopkins, but let me look at the rest of the roster. Oh, well, there's quite a bit of a drop-off in talent at the wide receiver position. That's tough. But at the same time, you got to look at this from a fiscal standpoint and understand that the Cardinals need as much money and assets as they possibly can right now, because this is a rebuilding team. This is not a reloading team. This is not a one-year project. This is going to take some time to get off the ground. And part of that is understanding that a receiver over the age of 30 is not going to have as much value to you in 3 years as he is going to be as a trade asset right now this year.
You know, what's really interesting is that whenever you look at the Cardinals cap hits heading into 2023, DeAndre Hopkins, obviously number one with that $30.75 million cap hit for next season. The second highest, DJ Humphries at $18 million. What? That's almost a $12 million gap between the highest paid Cardinal and the second highest paid Cardinal. So I definitely get it. And this comment actually leads right into my next point. Shout out to Gavin. Thank you for watching. Really appreciate you. He says, time to clean house. That goes for drama queen Kyler Murray. He's part of the problem, but we are stuck with him. Gavin, brother, I am so sorry. Kyler Murray is not going anywhere. Kyler Murray is not going anywhere. And how I want to tie this point in.
And that's for better or for better.
Yes. If they're going to tie Kyler's opinion into who's going to be the next head coach, you obviously care about Kyler Murray, right? He's a franchise quarterback. Want to make sure he's happy. I don't think Kyler's too happy to hear about his top target potentially being offloaded.
No, he can't be. And this comes after a year where they went all in for Kyler and traded for his old college teammate, Hollywood Brown. Like, that's really tough to go from, man, my team traded for my one of my favorite teammates in college, and I have DeAndre Hopkins, and I have Zach Ertz, and I have all these other options. And now you're going into 2023, potentially DeAndre Hopkins list. That's going to be a difficult curve, but it's a necessary one because it's going to be part of Arizona's progression to the next stage of themselves as a franchise. And it's not as though you can't bring in some other receivers, especially through the draft where there are some talented guys. If for some reason the Cardinals wanted to trade back up in the first round, or God forbid they traded down to acquire more assets, there are quality receivers. Heading into this year, there's quality receivers next year. All I'm saying is if the Cardinals stink again next year, there is a receiver named Marvin Harrison Jr. who would completely transform this wide receiver core.
Yeah, so you look at talented guys. You have Marquise Brown, obviously, and I think part of the reason they do want to offload Hopkins is because like Marquise is going to be due for a payday here soon, whether it's this offseason or next offseason. You do want to take care of him. And obviously, being Kyler Murray's former college roommate / teammate obviously helps a ton as well. I thought Greg Dortch did phenomenal this year. I certainly hope he returns to the Cardinals in 2023. Then you look at guys like Rondale Moore with the second-round pick price tag on him. You hope that whoever is calling the plays next for Arizona can maximize him as a receiver. Turns out if you throw the ball downfield to a very speedy guy, he'll come down with it more times than not if you just put it on the money for him. Rondale Moore has shown to be very, very capable of being more than just a screen or a jet sweep kind of guy. I get it.
He's healthy.
Yeah, exactly. When Rondale's healthy. At the end of the year, and this will be a really good way to wrap up the show, now's the time. If you are going to orchestrate any kind of change for this team, for this organization, now is the time to do it. I don't think 2023 is going to be the year the Cardinals win the Super Bowl. I think this team, depending on some moves that could be made, I think this team could fight for a playoff spot next year. There's a lot of offseason left. The Cardinals have 30 free agents. J.J. Watt is retiring. A lot of question marks heading into next year. I think there's still a very, very good amount of talent for something to brew here in Arizona. But if you're looking for the future, and who says Hop wants to stay here?
Right.
Who says Hop is like, okay, I'm 30 years old. I want to go try to win a Super Bowl. That's why J.J. Watt came here. Because he wanted to win a Super Bowl. And, maybe seeing JJ go out the way he did might have kind of, I guess, turned a couple gears in Hop's head. We don't know. We do not know. DeAndre Hopkins is not going to play forever. He's made plenty of money thus far. He has already established himself as one of the best receivers of his generation. Obviously, the Hall of Fame argument is pending at this point. A lot of people are going to point towards the suspension and try to use that against him. All I'm saying is DeAndre Hopkins wants to win a Super Bowl. I don't think that's going to happen in Arizona before his career is over.
Not in Arizona. There's a better opportunity if a Green Bay Packers or a Baltimore Ravens gives him a call and tries to pick him up. Heck, there's a better opportunity if a New England Patriots gives him a call.
Ooh, I don't know about that. I'm not sure about the Patriots.
I'm not either. I
would say better. But how much better?
Just depends if Mac Jones takes that next step forward. But this isn't all Patriots. This is all Cardinals.
This is all Cardinals, indeed. All right, my friend, we've talked about Kliff Kingsbury. We've talked about Steve Keim. We've talked about DeAndre Hopkins. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Don't be afraid to make a risky decision. I think right now is not the time to be safe. I think right now is the time to go all in on your future and go for a guy like a Steichen or D'Amico Ryans, because the upside and potential is there. I know it's scary, but I think you've been playing it too safe lately. I think now's the time to go out.
A couple stragglers here in the comments right before we leave. Both people wanting Sean Payton as head coach. With Michael Bidwell's reaction to whenever somebody asks him about Sean Payton, I definitely am not going to discount it. I'm just not sure the draft capital is going to be worth it.
I'm not sending the third pick. I can tell you that much right now.
Yeah, I personally am not sending the number 3 overall pick for Sean Payton. I'm going to try my luck elsewhere. But, I mean, like I said, we're just two dudes on a podcast that write about football, and they're paid to make decisions. So, I'm sure they will do their absolute best to ensure winning football returns to the desert. I want to conclude with this. There's the football culture in Arizona is not like any other place. It's not like a Green Bay Packers. It's not like a Dallas Cowboys. It's not like a Pittsburgh Steelers. It's not the roots of professional football here in Arizona don't extend very, very far. You see it whenever opposing fans come to the stadium. You see it whenever a team like the Raiders or a team like basically any other team comes to State Farm Stadium. Those fans outnumber Cardinals fans left and right. I know that's a problem. Richie Bradshaw knows that's a problem. And Michael Bidwell knows that's a problem too. I think that's why changes are being made. And I think that's why changes are coming. I think this offseason has the potential to be one of the most important, if not the most important, in Arizona Cardinals history. Granted, that's not a very, very long history, but if you make the right calls here, the chance to change your organization's trajectory and to put fans back in the seat, give them hope like you did in 2015, like you did in 2008, that is more valuable than however much money you were paying Kliff Kingsbury, however much money you were paying the next head coach, and whatever other costs you need, because at the end of the day, winning solves everything.
Yes,
well, obviously, if the Arizona Cardinals can fix that asset. For Richie, Bradshaw, I am Donnie, Druin. Thank you so much for listening to the All Cardinals podcast. Go find our work at si.com/NFL/Cardinals. Follow Richie on Twitter at RichieBrads36. Follow me on Twitter at Donnie Druin, and we will see you guys next time.